I've spent a great deal of time talking about Shar. In many ways, Shar is the primary deity of evil in the Forgotten Realms, as she was the first goddess of evil, the first goddess of darkness, and came before all others. But what is darkness without light? What is Shar without her eternal twin and foe, Selune? Selune is as much an eternal fixture of the Forgotten Realms as Shar is. But unlike Shar, she's waxed and waned over the millennia just as the moon does, which she's always represented, all the while retaining her core traits. Most creation myths suggest that after Eo had created the crystal sphere of realm space, that all there was primordial chaos, and that out of this primordial chaos stuff, the twin goddesses Shar and Selune emerged, and at the moment of their conception, both goddesses were polar opposites, light and darkness, good and evil, and yet, despite this, they saw themselves as one being of how close they felt to each other, and later were sometimes even called the two-faced goddess. And they came together to create the world of Toril from the formless ether, and shortly after the world had been formed, a third goddess emerged from creation, Shantea, the Earth Mother, and she sought to infuse the world with life. But the requirement for this was that Selune and Shar give Shantea the power, and therefore the warmth and life to do so, and the twins Shar and Selune were of two different minds on this, as Shar was always a being of darkness, and Selune a being of light, and Selune wished to aid Shantea in her endeavor. This was the beginning of the war of light and darkness, because from their inception Shar and Selune were inextricably linked polar opposites of each other, and the decision to populate the world ran counter to Shar's innate desire for nothingness, and they warred with each other. And from these battles many ancient deities of death, magic, war, and others emerged. Selune reached into the plane of fire to give Shantea the light and warmth she needed, which caused Selune harm as the fire burnt her. This pushed Shar over the edge, and she lashed out at Selune, tearing out her divine essence and causing the already weakened goddess grievous injury. And Shar's essence combined with Selune's, and from the combined essence of the twin goddesses emerged Mistral, the goddess of magic, a being of both light and dark, and in some sense a daughter of both goddesses, who immediately sought a truce to this war that threatened to destroy the world. This war is said to have permanently wounded Selune, as she had given more of herself to help create the world than her sister, which it is claimed is the reason why her power has waxed and waned over the millennia, whereas that of Shar has remained largely static. But Selune, unlike Shar, has built friendships and alliances with many deities and beings, and can rely on these for support and aid, whereas Shar can only rely on herself. The only time that Shar and Selune have ever set aside their differences was during a period called the Dawn War. The Dawn War was a prolonged conflict between the primordials, beings of elemental chaos, but after this had been resolved, the goddess's old enmity resumed. From then on, Selune worship has been persistent in the realms, and she was worshipped as a major deity in Netheril, going so far as to save an entire city during the cataclysm known as Karsus' Folly, by transporting it to her outer planar realm. Later still, during an event called the Dawn Cataclysm, Selune was instrumental in separating the then singular goddess of luck, Tukay, into two separate goddesses, Timur and Bashaba, as the goddess had become corrupted by the god of rot, Moander. Selune allegedly shed tears over this separation, which led to the creation of a powerful artifact called the Tear of Selune. Now, much of this is not truly verifiable, as much of myth is not verifiable, but we must believe that certain kernels of truth nonetheless reside in the stories we are told, whether apocryphal or not. For example, that the conflict and hostility between the goddesses is not haphazard, and likely had its roots in actual events, as well as the goddesses being inextricably linked to each other. Much, much later, during recordable history, Selune chose to live part of her life as a mortal called Luna in Waterdeep, and she ran the tavern and inn called Selune's Smile, with her divine power locked away behind a magical door. When the time of troubles hit, Selune was initially unaware as she decided to walk the realms as Luna, but soon discovered the presence of other avatars of other deities who were forced against their will. It was at this time that Shar impersonated an avatar of Selune and tricked many of her devotees into following her, going so far as to take over her temple, the House of the Moon. Luna was imprisoned, and over time lost her mind, but was restored to sanity almost too late when she rediscovered her true identity and transformed into a true avatar of the goddess, battling Shar over the streets of Waterdeep, narrowly defeating her, and then reverting back to the form of Luna. After the time of troubles, and throughout the era of upheaval, Selune has remained an important deity, right up until the present. Unlike Shar, who, despite being secretive, is ultimately transparent in her goals of annihilation, Selune is more nuanced and less consumed by an all-encompassing purpose. And unlike Shar, Selune has many allies, and even friends among the gods and elsewhere. She's allied with all gods of light, magic, joy, luck, beauty, as well as many of the elven gods. Over the ages, Selune has lost and gained power, and our portfolios have changed slightly. But above all, Selune is the goddess of the moon and its light, and the hope it represents, and is worshipped by many. Sailors out at sea worship her to guide them home safely. Those who work at night pray to her for protection from the darkness, and good-hearted lycanthropes revere her as a guide and protector. Additionally, many mystics and diviners worship Selune and respect her for her influence on magic via the moon. The faithful of Selune are bidden to practice acceptance and tolerance as their greatest virtue, and are expected to treat all kindly and fairly, and remain open and understanding to all those they encounter, and to be welcoming to the faith, should others show interest in it. But one thing remains constant, no matter what the other doctrines of the faithful are, and that is opposition to Shar. In fact, there are whole orders devoted to the goddess, whose sole task is to practice vigilance and combat Sharans and Sharan influence, called the Swords of the Lady and the Moon Knights. In short, much of Selune's goals and ethos lie understandably in direct opposition to Shar's, which comes as no surprise. And of course, as players of Baldur's Gate 3 Early Access, you probably have not missed the prominence of Selune in the game thus far, even given the fact that it's early access. The entire goblin camp has been erected around and on top of a former temple to the goddess. Then there's the shrine in the cave, and finally, the Selunite outpost in the Underdark. These are not things that have been randomly placed there. And you're also probably aware of my belief that Shar will be playing a very large role in the game, beyond what has already been hinted at, and of the theory that Shadowheart might in fact be a brainwashed former worshipper of Selune. And I think that we will actually have the opportunity to possibly interact with both goddesses, so all the more reason to understand their motives and their natures. Considering this, a Selune cleric or paladin campaign in concert with Shadowheart could prove to be most interesting, and certainly something I've planned for the future. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.